On behalf of the World Affairs Council, I am Terry Kramer, the moderator for this evening's program. It's a pleasure to have all of you here. And as a long-term member of the Council's board, it's been a pleasure to be engaged with the various topics and members here at the World Affairs Council. The members are a critical part of what we do, as you can imagine. And I just want to take a moment to thank all of you as members here and any new members that we have. It's a pleasure again to have you with us. I also want to just say a thank you to our members who are the foundation of the Council, that continue to support the Council in so many ways. It's now my pleasure to introduce tonight's guest, Janet Napolitano, who's had a long and distinguished career in public service. She previously served as the Governor of Arizona, the Attorney General of Arizona, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Arizona, and practiced at the law firm of Lewis & Rocha in Phoenix. Prior to her current appointment, President Napolitano served as the Secretary of Homeland Security from 2009 to 2013. She's now taken on a new challenge as President of the University of California, where she leads a university system that is made up of 10 campuses, 5 medical centers, 3 affiliated national laboratories, and a statewide agriculture and natural resources program. The University of California enrolls a diverse student body. 1/3 of the students identify as Latino, African American, or American Indian. 45% of UC freshmen are first-generation college students, and 1,300 military veterans are currently enrolled. The UC system also strives to support students from lower-income families. About half of all the students pay no tuition. In her new role, President Napolitano seeks to promote diversity and access in addition to pursuing other important initiatives. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Janet Napolitano. So let me start out here. First of all, I was mentioning to you earlier what an impressive career you've had across so many areas: law, public service, and now academia. Tell us now, you've been in the role about a year. How has the transition been from Washington to academia?
Well, there are some differences and there are some similarities. It is such a pleasure to be in California. DC is a very tough and mean town right now, and riven and destructively so with partisan politics, so that big issues just can't move forward. The one I was most involved with was immigration reform, but climate change, energy, all sorts of things are just stuck. So it's a very, very tough town to work in. California, different climate physically, different climate in so many ways, lots of energy, lots of innovation, creativity going on in the state. And you can really sense and feel that when you make that transition. Now, the transition from being the head of a large federal agency, and DHS is the 3rd largest federal department. It was created after the attack of 9/11. From 23 different agencies that were all put together under one umbrella, from different legacy departments: Justice, Transportation, Treasury, et cetera, to leading this large public research university with the 10 campuses, et cetera. Both involve managing large, complex organizations, large budgets. DHS about $54 billion a year. UC is about $24 billion a year, and lots of very, very smart, intense people. I'll just put it that way.
There'll be a future question on that.
And each job requires a certain amount of political skill and judgment in different ways. So differences in terms of DC versus California, different organizations from DHS to UC, different missions. But in terms of managing something that's large and complex, where a lot of interpersonal skills are required, a lot of similarity.
Interesting, interesting. And so you've taken the job, it's been a year. What have been some of your early impressions, good and bad, opportunities, challenges that you've seen?
You know, when I accepted the position, I heard from a lot of people saying, oh, the UC, it's been cut to the bone, it's going downhill, and so forth. What I was pleasantly surprised to learn is that, yes, it had some budget cuts. Yes, it had to retool some things, but the bones of the university are strong. The research being done is vital and vibrant and cutting edge. And in terms of kind of the statistical abstracts that you look at, the numbers are all moving in the right direction. So pleasantly surprised that this great institution that California has built and has had continues to grow and to thrive. We're going to have to fight to keep it that way. And that, I think, will really be part of the definition of my tenure as the president, is fighting that fight and winning that battle. So that was a surprise on the good side. I would say one of the biggest surprises on the negative side was the role of high-level intercollegiate athletics. And I'm talking really about football and basketball and the amount of money that goes into those programs and how it's harder and harder to keep them linked to the fact that these are student athletes and these are part of the overall aspect of the university, not separate and distinct departments. But I think the NCAA and the role of student athletics at the highest level is something that requires a serious look.
And a need for rebalancing, too much focus on athletics to the cost of other things, or not that big an issue?
Well, you know, the money doesn't come from tuition dollars. The money comes basically from television dollars. So it's not that so much as what do we want athletics to be in a university setting? What role should they have? And how should that be managed? And how should the athletes be treated?
Okay. Tell us a little bit more about the initiatives and priorities you see going forward. You know, one of the mottos that we've heard you mention is Teach for California, Research for the World.
Right.
But tell us more about what is your mantra, what are your initiatives?
Well, when you think about what the UC does, we teach for California, but we research for the world in so many different areas. So we have a number of initiatives underway. Teach for California, that means being and remaining open and accessible to the wide diversity of California students. So how we support undocumented students who can't get federal student aid, and making sure that they at least have equivalent access to resources while they are students at the University of California. It means developing a tuition model that keeps tuition as low and as predictable as possible. You know, one of the real complaints during the recession was not only was tuition going up, but it would go up and then at least one year it went up twice during the same year. So low and predictable. And what does that require and enable us to provide the quality education that we do? And then how do we link up more firmly with California employers and the long-term view of California's economy to make sure that we are producing students who can go into that economy and help that economy thrive. So, you know, that's the Teach for California part. And we also teach virtually all the physicians, a lot of the attorneys, the other professionals in California, and we are the PhD granting institution for the state, the primary one. Research for the World It is everything. It's agriculture, it is energy and sustainability, it is cutting edge work in new fields and emerging fields. So when we say research for the world, what we mean is how do we support that research mission? How do we have the graduate students that support it? How do we keep and retain the great faculty? And how do we deploy them in ways that help answer some of the world's great problems? So last week, we rolled out the Global Food Initiative, where we are uniting the research powers of our 10 campuses on terms of really looking at what it will take to put the world on a pathway to a sustainable, secure, and nutritious food future.
Excellent. Tell us a bit more on the budget situation, because you alluded to it. Tuitions for students have continued to go up. I know there may have been a reprieve in the last year, but tuition's gone up. Budget situation has been tough. And the question is, where is that budget environment going, and what are the longer-term implications on tuition and the cost of higher education there?
Well, we froze tuition this year, and this will be the third year in a row that there has been no tuition increase. And as was mentioned earlier, if your family, if you come from a family whose income is less than $80,000, you pay no tuition. And if you're between 80 and 150, you pay virtually no. There's substantial student aid, so that almost 2/3 of our students graduate with no debt whatsoever. Those who graduate with debt, it's way less than the national average. It's about 20,000, wish it was zero, but about 20,000 for the entire 4 years. The national average is more like 26 or 27. So we've got to keep our costs down. We've got to keep looking for ways to bend the cost curve. But we have to do that with an eye toward what does it mean to have a quality public research university, and what resources do we need for that? The plain fact of the matter is that the state of California puts less and less into higher education as a percentage of the state's overall budget. And when I say part of my job is to fight for the university, that's a big part of the fight. If California wants to have public higher education, at a certain point, it will need to invest more in that, recognizing that that is key to California's future as a state and as an economy that has the ability to continue to innovate, and by innovation, continue to grow.
So yeah, you've got a fan there. So say more, though, on the cost of higher education. President Obama has raised this issue nationally. Governor Brown has raised this issue about concern. The issue about affordability and access, et cetera, is how do you bend that cost curve? What role does online education play in all this?
Right.
How do you balance all of these competing interests to try and drive down that cost of higher education but maintain quality?
You know, the university and my predecessor, Mark Udoff, really did a masterful job. They've bent that cost curve significantly. I think what's happened in the United States generally is that state support for public higher education went down drastically during the recession, and it's not coming up. And we can talk about, well, what are the reasons for that? But that's the reality. So. Well, what does that mean? What it means is that by some calculation, the state pays about 6% of our operating costs. 6. And even viewed most generously, and I'm taking out UCSF at this point, it's about 12.5. So it's really a state-assisted university in this regard. We have to change our thinking and say, all right, we're going to need philanthropy to be increased. We're going to need to do things in public-private partnerships. And I think we can do a lot more there that will rebound to the university's benefit. And you know, we're going to have to rethink the whole paradigm of what it means to be a public university. Now, there are going to be a lot of different ways to do a university education in this century. One way is, and the business model that I think is most likely to fail, is the traditional small private liberal arts college. Those are getting tougher and tougher to sustain. But when I look at university, there will be a role for online and for technology and the like. But that will only be one tool in a toolbox that we need to deploy. And I got to tell you, when you're a public research university, that is not a model that is susceptible to being 100% online. We want to be research-based, faculty-based, and really give these young people that quality interaction with graduate students, with assistant professors, the opportunity to work in teams, the opportunity to be in laboratories, all the things that create that innovative atmosphere that is California's hallmark today.
So how pervasive will online education be? I mean, in the home of Silicon Valley, people say you have to disrupt the business model because the costs are too high, things have to change. How big will online education be, and how do you get people supportive of it, especially the faculty, which I would assume would be mixed about the prospect of online education?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, when online education was first raised, it was raised as a silver bullet. This is going to solve all our problems with providing higher ed, and you could do it cheap through these things called MOOCs, massive online courses. Which it turns out don't work very well and don't produce good educational outcomes. But the field has changed very, very rapidly, as you might imagine, and now there's all different ways of doing online, you know, kind of what they call a hybrid or flip courses, where part of the course is taught in the lecture hall, part of it resides with the student and his or her computer. Different types of ways that you can use technology to create a virtual classroom, as it were. So those are the kinds of things that excite me. And the production values need to get better and better. You know, the notion that you're going to sit in front of your computer and watch somebody lecturing at you for an hour and learn a lot is not very persuasive. So, you know, like imagine doing that. So day in and day out. But as the field has evolved, even over the last couple of years, the teaching methods, the production values, et cetera, have gotten better and better. So that's why I say there will be and is a role for online within the University of California, but not to the detriment of our identity as a public research university.
Good, helpful, very helpful. Let me ask you another set of questions, again on this theme of accessibility. An interesting statistic here. If you look at two-year community colleges and the number of community colleges that have transfer students into the UC system, the statistic says that just 19 colleges sent about half of all the 14,000 students that were transfer students into the UCs. So only 19 community colleges are really sending students to UCs.
Out of the 112, yeah.
Yeah, there are 93 other ones that basically are not sending many at all. How do you improve that accessibility for all of those other community colleges to really kind of achieve the accessibility you talk about?
Well, you know, the master plan, which is the master plan is how higher ed in California is designed. And the master plan is 50 years old. It was the creation in part of Governor Pat Brown. And basically it said, look, we're going to have all of these great two-year schools, then known as junior colleges, now community colleges, with the notion that you would then do you could do 2 years there for free, and then 2 years at and finish up at the University of California or Cal State University. The master plan has, over 50 years, has crumbled somewhat. But the basic notion of it, community colleges, state university, and then the UC is the PhD granting institution, is still there. What we are doing is saying, let's work across the segments. So I work a lot with the head of the state university, Tim White, the head of the community college system, Bryce Harris. Let's work together. Let's advocate in Sacramento together. And then let's identify how we can make the transfer process easier, more efficient, and more diffuse. So we did a big transfer action report. It was just released at the last Regents meeting. And one of the parts of that is we're identifying 30 additional community college districts that have, we think the potential to really be more participatory in that 2-year to 4-year continuum that we're going to work over this coming year to develop strong pipelines with. And once we get those established, then we can go on to others and hence to others. So we have that very much on our minds.
Let me start taking a variety of questions from the audience. We've gotten quite a few. One of the popular sets of topics is what the practice of many of the UCs now to take out-of-state residents to drive up the tuition, in essence making it more difficult for in-state residents to get a position. What is your view on that? Is that sustainable? Does that meet your goal for an accessible UC system?
Yeah, actually, the role of out-of-state and international students comprise about 12% of the overall undergraduate student body at the University of California. But they comprise a higher number, closer to 20 at Berkeley and UCLA, our two so-called flagship campuses. But the plain fact of the matter is that without the tuition, because they pay a much higher tuition rate, and basically every one of those out-of-state students supports at least one in-state student. Without them, the university would have had to cap enrollment during the recession, if not reduce enrollment. And so the regents had a very difficult set of decisions before them. One was to increase tuition even more than they already increased it. One was to cap or reduce enrollment overall, or one was to increase the number of out-of-state students who would support, by that, doing that, support increased enrollment of California residents. Now, I also think there's something healthy in terms of, in this world, our undergraduates should have some exposure to people from different backgrounds and different countries and the like. So there is an independent value there. But the financial value is the one I think the question focuses on. When you look at public universities around the country, our percentage of out-of-state students is very, very low. So schools like Virginia and Michigan are comparator-type institutions, are running about 40%, if not more, in out-of-state students. We're not going to do that. But I do think we will see over the next years, some fluctuation in that out-of-state international number moving forward.
Is this something to fight over? To basically say, listen, we don't want to be kind of beholden to out-of-state residents and the tuition. We need better funding in the UC system and kind of make a stand on that?
Well, it could be. I mean, if we were going to 40, I would say absolutely that's a fight. I think that the legislature has not provided funding for enrollment growth in the UC system since 2007. Zero. And we got zero this year. So what are we supposed to do? We could jack up tuition again for our in-state students, or we could take a more balanced approach. And I think, again, we're not close to what I would call the danger zone, and make sure that we have, 12, 13, 15% out of state.
Helpful. There's a variety of questions on affirmative action. What role should race play in the admission policy of the UC?
None, and that's by law. This state 20 years ago passed Proposition 209. It bans the use of race or ethnicity in conferring benefits like admission, and we adhere to that. However, there are lots of ways that I think it's important, lots of things we can do that are not banned by Proposition 209 that enable us to make sure that the doors of the university remain as open as possible to the wide diversity that is California. Part of that is, working with school districts in terms of pipeline programs, summer bridge programs for students from lower performing school districts to prepare those students to enter the University of California. We saw this year, for the first time, the number of Latino students accepted into the freshman class exceeds the number of white students accepted into the freshman class. So demographics is playing an inexorable role there as well. So, and finally, the fact that we have such generous student aid, more generous than any state university system that I know about at our level, that in and of itself helps with the diversity question.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Tell us now broadly, you talked about the research initiative of the school, about innovation, the role of the school in innovation, given again California and the Silicon Valley and how important that is. What actions are the schools taking to drive up innovation that creates economic benefit, employment opportunities, et cetera?
Oh, there's so much going on, and it's very exciting. It's everything from having incubators at places like UCSF and UCLA. What's an incubator? Well, very simply, QB3 at UCSF. It's a building with lab benches and space and equipment that graduate students and assistant professors and the like, they just rent the space. They share the equipment, they share the facility, and then we have an outside board that has raised private venture capital that helps those young people get access to private venture capital as they seek to move out into the marketplace with their research and the application of their research. Mm-hmm. So incubators, it is taking a much more, I think, current view on the relationship of university research to an innovation economy like California. So, for example, historically, the UC has precluded any researcher or the university from taking an equity interest in any company that evolves or develops out of research done in our labs. I looked at it, looked at what other institutions are doing, thought about it, and we took that prohibition off a couple of weeks ago. And that has caused a lot of excitement on our campuses. Probably some of those UCLA business students are getting in this now.
They're going to make money out of this.
Yeah, and so I think there's a lot going on in that space.
Yeah. Excellent. How much do you think it could be worth? How big could this all be?
Oh, I think it could be amazing. And it's not just financial. Some of our research is so amazing, but it will not get out to affect the world or change the world without being linked somehow to the market to distribute it, right? Mm-hmm. Because not everybody out there reads academic journals. But the market, properly done, and and I want to emphasize here properly, that needs to be credible, peer-reviewed. Conflict of interest rules need to be adhered to very strictly, but properly done, the link between a university like UC and the market can be mutually beneficial.
Yeah, makes sense. Let me take a couple of questions from students right now. First one is, what advice do you have for a student applying to UC today?
Study hard. Yeah. I mean, it is tough to get in. UCLA this year, for the second year in a row, had more applications than any other university in the country. Yeah, and Berkeley's right up there. Our other schools, Davis and San Diego and Irvine and Santa Barbara, Santa Cruz, et cetera, these are very popular in-demand institutions because they are great universities and they're a smoking deal for an education. So I would say study hard and don't study so hard that you don't also find some things to do that you enjoy on the outside. We do a holistic review of applications. Even given the thousands that we get, it's not only the numbers. It's also, you know, who are you as a person, and do we assess that you will have the ability to succeed at the university?
Is there, I tend to think of the UCLA statistics. I'm trying to remember what the percent admit rate is. I thought it was like maybe only 10% or less.
I think it's, let me not say, because if I get it wrong, then whatever, but
it's low.
It's pretty low.
It's pretty low.
Yeah.
Is there a number in your mind it should be? Again, talking about accessibility for California students, what should the number be? Because, I mean, if it's below 10%, that's a really low number of students getting into the UC system, meaning they've got to go somewhere else.
Well, no, they may not get into UCLA, but they may get into another UC school. So we for students who are open to the suggestion, often offer other alternatives to the first choice, if the first choice was not something the student qualified for. So I don't think there is a right number. I will say this, though. I talked about the master plan earlier. And I also talked about the not paying for enrollment growth. I think this state is at some point going to have to revisit what its fundamental investment in public higher education is going to be. Because we only have so many seats, and that capacity and capacity building is not something you do and like a light switch you turn on and off. It needs to be part of a long-term plan. We have now a working group. I've said, I asked the question, well, how many students do we think we need to prepare to enroll under, you know, if we had, you know, infinite capacity? We don't have a good handle on what that number would be long term. So we've got a working group now working cross-segment with the community colleges, with the state university, about what is the long-term enrollment trajectory? What should we be preparing for? How do we double down on higher education in this state?
And then how do you make the play then in the ask for the funding? Does it come from the state of California? Is it private funding? Is it innovation? Is it all the above?
Yes, yes, and yes. Yeah, yeah, it's all. I mean, I think, you know, historically, public university, you know, the federal government gave you the land and paid for all the research, and the state paid for the operating costs, including the faculty, and if there was a little bit left over, that's what tuition covered. That model is gone, and I don't know that that model will ever come back in that way. Wow. So that's what I mean when I say there has to be, and we are undergoing a paradigm shift. It's cost containment and looking at how we bend our cost curve, but we're not going to cut costs to excellence. So we always have to keep in mind, what does an excellent public research university provide for a young person? What opportunities are there? How do we support that teaching and research mission, and then different ways of accomplishing that?
Makes sense. Let me take another student question here. What is your mindset through life that led you to your success? How can a teenager develop a similar model? Should write a book, by the way.
Yeah, mindset. Boy, that's an interesting question. I don't know if it's a mindset, but I think you have to be. I think you have to work hard. I think You have to be open to new experiences. I think you have to set stretch goals for yourself. And I think you have to maintain a sense of humor as you go through life's ups and downs. So,
great, great. Another student asks about plans to build other UCs, and there's a specific request here for one in San Jose, in Silicon Valley. I don't know if we're going to vote on that.
Yeah. Well, actually, UC Santa Cruz owns land in Moffett Field, or we have arrangements there. And I'm not saying we're building another university there, but we have several areas in the Bay Area that we're looking at for possible expansion. Another is Berkeley campus at Richmond Bay, at the city of Richmond. And so, yes, we do have plans for expansion in that regard. So those are long term. I think that linkage with Silicon Valley and with particularly the mindset of Silicon Valley, there's a reason why Silicon Valley is where it is. I mean, you have all these great world-leading education institutions right around it who are providing the brains, the researchers, the talents, et cetera, et cetera. So I think as we continue to see, for example, Silicon Valley expand into the East Bay now. Silicon Valley's kind of filled up. There's like no housing there to speak of left. That there will be opportunities for mutual growth.
Makes sense. Question on the athletic piece here. How can you rebalance, this was specific to UC Berkeley, how can you rebalance UC Berkeley sports to the quote-unquote lesser sports of lifetime health, tennis, things other than probably basketball and football, et cetera?
Well, it's interesting. Berkeley has an amazing athletic tradition, and a lot of that is in sports like swimming, like tennis, et cetera. I think probably one of the best athletes we have in the University of California, male or female, is Missy Franklin, who just finished, is an Olympic swimmer, just finished her freshman year swimming for Berkeley. I think we've got a good balance with those students and those student athletes. What I was talking about is the need for all universities who are governed by the NCAA to work through, I think, some particularly acute issues that have arisen with the amount of money, outside money, that now comes into men's football and basketball.
Okay. We've got quite a few questions on Homeland Security, so I'm going to shift a little bit there. You weren't going to get away without answering these questions. So first of all, reflecting on your experience when you were Homeland Security Secretary, what were your reflections on it, and what regrets did you have, if any, from that role?
It's a fascinating job, a very difficult, challenging job. It is the quintessential 24/7 position in the United States government, because not only do you have the counterterrorism related mission and all that entails, you've also got Mother Nature and natural disasters, because FEMA is part of the Department of Homeland Security. So I think that the department is still growing. It's still maturing. It's just 10 years old now, which is, a baby in terms of growing a large federal department. I think we managed to, put some packaging around it, to organize it, to do some really great talent recruitment. We did a few things I'm particularly proud of. I think we fixed FEMA. I think FEMA now is the best disaster response organization in the world, of any nation. And I know that because other nations would come to me saying, how do we do what you now do with FEMA? And it weren't always the case, as we know, post-Katrina. So, so there a few of those things we were able to nail down. Had I stayed, I think an area that was requiring increased focus and would be occupying more and more of my time would be the area of cyber and cybersecurity, where I just saw the level of activity. The growth curve was very, very steep, even over the 4 3/4 years I was there. And then in terms of regret/frustration, anger, quite frankly, the failure of the Congress to pass to pass immigration reform, and it really puts DHS in an impossible position. Why? Because we are sworn to enforce the law and uphold the law, but the law itself requires reform. Unfortunately, we got a pretty good bill through the Senate, but it just died in the House of Representatives, and who knows now when it will come back.
So you touched on it now, the current situation, the travesty going on the border with a lot of youth coming from Honduras and Guatemala, et cetera. What is your view on that current situation, and importantly, what could be a solution there?
There's no solution. I mean, if there were a solution, it would have been solved. It's going to be a combination of things. It's going to be a better and more expedited, efficient handling of the cases that arise, recognizing that illegal or undocumented immigrants from those 3 countries have different rights as part of a law that was passed at the end of the Bush administration. So it's going to be more resources at the border to actually process the cases and move them through. It's going to have to require more in the way of humanitarian assistance for the children, so that they are not kept longer than absolutely necessary, but certainly no longer than 72 hours in a Border Patrol holding facility. There's a place for them to go, and a place for them where they'll be safe and secure, well-fed, well-nourished, etc. So that's going to be part of it. Part of it's going to require those countries to do more, to send the message that people will be returned. They will not be entitled to legal status in the United States. And we need more help there. And I think we need to work with the governments of those countries in terms of gang violence and drug trafficking and so forth. There are things we can do that would improve the situation. But it will have to be a whole array of things because, again, if there were an easy or simple solution, it would have been done already.
It would have been handled. Okay. Let me ask you about the overall security threat in the United States overall. If you look at the unrest in places like Iraq, in Syria, in Egypt, et cetera, where do you rate overall security threat in the U.S.? Is it gotten worse, or is it the same, or actually with all the good work, things are actually relatively okay?
Well, I think it's interesting. Having a position like I had, where you're briefed daily about what is happening in the world and who's trying to kill each other and who's trying to kill us, it opens your eyes and it does change your perspective on things. We live in a very complex and dangerous world. I think our abilities overall to mitigate threat, to deal with it, et cetera, I think our abilities are much improved over what they were pre-9/11. I think that our ability to respond is much improved over what they were pre-9/11. I'm not going to rank levels of dangerousness. Why? Because you never know. You never know with certainty where or what could happen. So you have to do everything you can to reduce the possibility that a threat will actually materialize and be successful, and then you have to be ready at the right away to drop of a penny to get in there and respond.
Related topic, what do you see as the top security threat facing California itself?
Well, I don't know if you would call this security, but Mother Nature and climate change are having and will have a profound impact in California. We see it with drought and fire now. These things are only going to continue to grow. We will see it as the sea level rises, the effect on infrastructure. Take, for example, the runways at the Oakland airport. I fly in and out of there most frequently. They're right there. So the effect on and cost of infrastructure is going to be very serious and very long term. When you really think about what is going to change the quality of people's lives and what we need to be dealing with right now and investing in right now, it is the whole area of climate and climate change.
And say more about what the UC system is doing, because you've got some interesting things I think you've set as targets within the UC system as well as research efforts.
Right. Well, one of our goals is that we will be carbon neutral by 2025 as a system, including our laboratories and our hospitals. And to do that will require a lot of research and cutting-edge use of new materials and development of new materials and technologies. But in my view, we occupy a large footprint within California. We ought to be good environmental stewards and environmental examples ourselves. And by the way, our students are passionate about this. So it's a great goal, but it's also a wonderful educational mission.
Great. On a somewhat lighter note, how did you manage to become the governor of Arizona as a Democrat?
Yeah, I got more votes. Actually, Arizona is much more moderate than it is portrayed in many respects. Of course, that bar is low. But I found, that if you talk with people and you answer their questions and you admit when you don't know something, you admit when you made a mistake, etc. When people disagree with you, if you explain the reasons for your action and give them that respect, they will say, you know what, I didn't agree with her on that, but I like the fact that she explained what she did. So, and I think it was just a constant thing. So I'm not the first Democrat to have been elected in Arizona, just saying. Mo Udall, Bruce Babbitt, Dennis DeConcini, to name the other three. Just kidding. But, and I don't think I'll be the last.
Okay, good. A couple of questions here about the operating environment at UC, and you've kind of touched on your leadership skill. But UC having kind of a reputation that you have all these different 10 campuses that are very independent, got their own minds about what they want to do. You've got faculty that have a set of interests that often doesn't always align with students and legislators, et cetera. How do you work in that environment? What has it been like? Do you worry about that issue? Or frankly, from Homeland Security and other organizations, you've got the background on it?
Yeah. Well, you know what? I love that environment. I love the variety. I love the different constituencies. I love the whole sense of vibrancy about it. It is never dull in my office, I will tell you that. I think we have a great mission and a great set of challenges. When you can go to work every day and thinking about how we're going to educate the next generation and how we're going to keep the California economy as innovative and creative as possible, and how we're going to link our research with what the world needs. I mean, what a great set of issues to work on.
Mm-hmm. What are the toughest issues?
Oh, they're always money. It's always money. Yeah, I mean, I've run a state, I've run a large federal agency. Now I have the University of California. You can always say, I don't have enough. Mm-hmm. You know what? So be it. I mean, you've got to figure out, all right, how are you going to accomplish what you want to accomplish with what you have? Mm-hmm. What can you deploy better? What can you rethink? What things are we doing that we really don't need to do? And you just got to keep at it, and you've got to be very tough on yourself where money is concerned.
Mm-hmm. Okay, makes sense. Talk to us a little bit about tenure. Tenure's come up recently. There was a recent court case, I'm trying to remember the specifics of it, that kind of struck down tenure in terms of affecting quality of education. Where do you see all of that today?
Well, that was a case on California's teacher tenure system. And there was a very interesting constitutional challenge raised to it on the theory that it deprives students of equal access or equal education. I think tenure exists for good and valid reasons. I think implementation of tenure in different circumstances has become problematic. And I think the public has consequently lost a lot of faith in tenure as a way to support our educators. Mm-hmm. Somehow that sense of trust and faith needs to be restored.
Mm-hmm. How will that play out, if you were to guess?
I don't know. I know that in the university setting, we have tenure. It's a very rigorous process. It is very, very rigorous. And only the faculty can convey tenure on other faculties. So, and they have in a sense, a self-interest in making sure that only those who really are performing are granted tenure. And I don't see the tenure system in that regard changing.
Okay, good. Broad question here from one of the questioners. Identify nations that you think the U.S. could learn from the most, whether it's related to Homeland Security, whether it's education, innovation, all the topics. What nations do you look at out there and say, we really should watch them and learn from them?
It depends on the topic area. I mean, there's no single nation. There are always experiments and innovations going on where good governance is concerned. There's, quite frankly, I would phrase the question a little differently. What kinds of programs and innovations are happening in America's cities and states that are working and moving the needle that the federal government ought to be looking at? For example, a lot of interesting work being done at the state level on prison population and recidivism, on juvenile justice, justice reform, on sentencing and criminal sentencing. And I think having some positive impacts, including some things going on here in California. So I would actually say, what can we look at in terms of what's already happening within our own borders that could be expanded to national?
Yeah. Okay. Let me ask you a final question here for the evening. Fast forward 5 or 10 years. What will the UC system look like? And what would you want your legacy to be 5 to 10 years from now?
Well, I think the UC system will continue to grow. We will continue to evolve. I think, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have to continue to experiment, to innovate, to look for ways that we guarantee that quality research education for the greatest number of Californians, while at the same time, making sure that we are keeping costs and tuition as low as possible. So I think you'll see a lot of evolutions and experiments. I think you'll see more incubators. I think you'll see more interactions with the private sector. I would venture to say that some of the leading research in the world in terms of advanced medical treatments for Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, mapping the brain, among other things, will be coming out of the University of California. And I never predict legacies because it does seem premature.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
what will, just to tag on a quick on the previous thing, what will a student's life be 5 to 10 years from now? You kind of say, how will education change? What will their experience at a UC be? How will it be different 5, 10 years from now?
I think there will be more online or hybrid type classes. I would like to see more of our students spend part of their undergraduate time studying abroad, because this is a global world into which they are graduating. I think that there will be more multidisciplinary courses, majors, et cetera. The traditional silos are breaking down in that regard, and more cross-campus opportunities throughout the system. Really making sure that our students, if we have the world's leading expert on X at Santa Barbara, and he's teaching a seminar or a course, why can't a student who's at Davis get access to that? So I think more multidisciplinary, cross-campus, more mix with technology in the learning environment, and as I mentioned, perhaps more international engagement.
Makes sense. Listen, let me thank you for a fascinating discussion. The breadth of issues that you covered reflects your successful career. Your candor that you shared all your answers with was outstanding. Thanks to the audience for great questions, and have a great evening.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Great job.